Hello, everyone. Tony Costa here from Toronto Apologetics. So glad that you could join us. I'd like to encourage our viewers, if they have not done so already, to subscribe to Toronto Apologetics. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is go to the bottom of the video screen and just click on the subscribe button, and you will be immediately connected to our channel. Also, would recommend that you also like the video and share the video as well. Well, as you can see, I have my two stuffy friends here. We've got our sheep here, that one sheep that was missing among the 99 and was found. As you probably saw from my previous videos, we do have a name for that sheep now. And the name of that sheep is Lamb Chop. Lamb Chop. Now, his little friend here, the whale, the stuffed whale here, that's right, that's a little whale here. That one of the young ladies in my church made for me as a gift, and we were looking for a name to call this whale, and we have finally found a name. And so a lot of our viewers suggested a number of names. So the name we've gone with for the little whale here is Willie, the Prince of Wales. Willie, the Prince of Wales. You may have heard of that movie Free Willy with the orca or the killer whale, but that is the name of this little whale, Willie, the Prince of Wales, and Lamb Chop. So you'll probably be seeing uh, a good number of videos with these little guys involved in it. Today, I want to talk about a question that is usually raised up, and that's the question of, is Christianity the white man's religion? Is Christianity the white man's religion? This is something we hear very frequently, particularly in the West. They assume that Christianity is just the white European man's creation and invention, and that Christianity and its white Jesus are a product of white privilege and the patriarchy. Now, that is nothing but pure nonsense. It's, as the English say, absolute rubbish. There is no truth to that whatsoever. Christianity did not evolve in North America. It did not come from North America or from Europe. Christianity emerged in a part of the world which we call the ancient Near East, and this would include the land of Israel and Syria and Iraq, where the ancient empires of Mesopotamia and Assyria and Babylon ruled, and also, of course, ancient Persia, which is modern day Iran, and of course, the powerful kingdom of Egypt in North Africa. So the Christian faith emerged out of the soil of the ancient Near East. And so there's a lot of questions associated with this. So not only did Christianity emerge from the ancient Near East, but Christianity also emerged from a Semitic speaking civilization. That is to say, that Jesus was born into a Semitic speaking family. He was raised in a Semitic speaking family with Semitic speaking neighbors. So he spoke Aramaic and Hebrew. And he also would have known Greek, as Greek had become the lingua franca of the world. And so Jesus comes from this part of the world that is part of what we would call the ancient Near East, and what is now presently called the Middle East. So all of these ancient civilizations, as I mentioned already, like Syria, Babylon, and Mesopotamia, a lot of these groups spoke what we call Semitic, the Semitic language like Hebrew and Aramaic, and as I said already, Assyrian and so on. Now, attached to this idea is, of course, this concept that Jesus, of course, there's this idea of well, was Jesus white? Was he black? Was he brown? Was he? And so there's a lot of depictions of him through the ages, and of course, a lot of these depictions are based on artist renderings. But Jesus was a Mediterranean Jew, lived again in the first century AD, and we know that he was a carpenter by trade or a stonemason, probably did both. And carpenters and stonemasons worked very hard, and they also worked under the hot sun. And so a Mediterranean Jew like Jesus would have probably looked very olive-skinned. That is to say, he would have had a darker complexion that would be the result, of course, of those who work under the hot sun. Now, what we need to understand about this idea of that Christianity is the white man's religion, if you look at some of the great thinkers, Black thinkers, African American thinkers on this question, people like Frederick Douglass, for example, who was an orator, a statesman. He wrote a number of biographies, even of himself, and he was also an abolitionist. So he was someone who was very active in the abolitionist movement to abolish slavery. Now, one of the things that I appreciate about Frederick Douglass, and in many respects, he was really the father of the civil rights movement. It wasn't so much Dr. Martin Luther King. Of course, he is the one who really advanced it in the 60s, 1960s, but Frederick Douglass was really the pioneer, one of the pioneers to bring about the civil rights action or the civil rights movement in the United States. And Frederick Douglass also, at a young age of 13, became a Christian. And he had no idea growing up and even into his older age. And mind you, in his older age, he was very attracted to certain speakers and even people like David Frederick Strauss, who wrote The Life of Jesus in 1835, and who was a liberal scholar. He was also attracted to secular philosophers like Robert Ingersoll, but he seemed to hold his faith quite strongly. And here we have a quote from Frederick Douglass, and you will notice that he doesn't speak of Christianity as some white man's religion or some invasion of white privilege. All this type of nonsensical language is used today, of course, by those in the woke movement. But this is what he says: I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. He means the United States here. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. So it's important to understand here that Douglass maintains, look at his first line, I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. In other words, Christianity rooted in Jesus Christ is pure, it's peaceable, it's impartial. What he hated was what he called the Christianity of this land, the one that revealed corruption, slaveholding, one that abused women and plundering babies from the cradle or taking children, this partial hypocritical view. And I think what Douglass is getting at here is what I usually call, and others have done this too. It's not original with me, but he is distinguishing between Christianity and churchianity. What is Christianity? Christianity is the teaching, the person of Christ. It is Christ at the center. That's Christianity. Churchianity is the history of the church, all the awful and terrible things that have been done in church history, including the slave trade. And so we need to understand that that's what Douglass is getting at. He loves the Christianity of Jesus Christ. That is that which holds Christ at the center, his teachings, following his teachings. What he doesn't like is the Christian version of that, or the secular version of Christianity that he saw in the land. He was a strong abolitionist. He was very active in Massachusetts and in other places in the North United States to bring about the abolition of slavery altogether. And so Frederick Douglass, this pioneer of the civil rights movement, had no issue recognizing he was able to differentiate between Christianity and churchianity. And therefore, he was one who was not at all encumbered with this type of thinking. In the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 26, the Apostle Paul at Mars Hill, or the Areopagus, clearly states, and he made, that's God, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So the Apostle Paul there tells us that God, from one man, that is Adam, he made every nation, all nations descend from Adam. We have a common ancestor in Adam. He created them from one man, and he determined the periods and the boundaries and the dwelling place of these various nations. And the King James, some of you may be familiar, and hath made of one blood all nations of men, for dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. So one man, one blood. We all have human DNA. We are all descended from one man, black, white, brown, red, yellow, whatever color you want to attribute to it. In the book of Acts, chapter 2, we have the account of Pentecost. And there we read about how when Peter preached the first gospel message there, that is at the beginning of the church, we are told there in the book of Acts that there were a number of people from various nations that were present in Pentecost in Jerusalem. And a number of these people, of course, came from various parts of the known world, including Africa. And so we read here, and how is it that we hear each of us in his own native language, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, that would be Iraq, Iran area, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus, this would be modern Turkey and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, which again is Africa, North Africa, and the parts of Libya, North Africa, belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, so as far west as Italy, both Jews and proselytes, that is to say, Jews who'd come to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, and proselytes who would be Gentile converts from those nations. So that would include Libyans and Egyptians and Mesopotamians, Elamites, and so on. And he also mentions Cretans and Arabians, so Cretans to the very south of Greece and Arabians from Arabia. And we hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. And so you could see here how all of these nations, including African nations, were in Jerusalem and heard the apostles and the 120 believers that were in the upper room on the day of Pentecost. They heard them speaking in their various tongues. Now, when we think of Abraham, we have some very interesting things to say here. Just give me a break here as I wet my whistle, as they say. Okay, so in the case of Abraham, Abraham was not a Westerner. Abraham was not from North America or South America or Central America. Abraham, who was Abram before God changed his name, Abraham was a Mesopotamian. He came from the region of what we call Iraq today. And he came from a city called Ur, a very well-known city, a city that has actually been excavated by archaeologists. And so the forefather of the Israelites and also the spiritual forefather of all believers in Jesus, who is also the son of Abraham, we are descended from a Mesopotamian, a man called from Mesopotamia, from Ur of the Chaldees, the area which would one day become the power center of Babylon. And so Abram, later renamed Abraham, was a Semite. He was from Mesopotamia. And so again, Christianity descends from Abraham. It does not descend from Europe. It descends from, again, the ancient Near East. It descends from a Mesopotamian by the name of Abraham. Because remember, Abraham being the father and forefather of the Israelites and the Jews also means that he's also a forefather of Jesus Christ as well. In the New Testament, we see also that there are African believers. So, for instance, in Mark 15, verse 21, we read about Jesus carrying his crossbeam to the place of execution. And we're told there that when he was overwhelmed with the weight of that crossbeam, it says that the Romans got Simeon or Simon of Cyrene to assist Jesus in carrying the crossbeam. Well, we are told there in Mark 15, verse 21, that it was Simon of Cyrene. Now, where is Cyrene? Cyrene is in Libya, which is, again, in North Africa. So Simon of Cyrene was an African. And clearly he became a believer in Jesus because in Mark 15, we're told that not only do we know his name is Simon of Cyrene, but he was also the father of Alexander and Rufus, who were known to the readers of the Gospel of Mark. And so here we have Simon, who is from Libya, from Cyrene, Libya. We also find the Nubian Ethiopian eunuch and royal official in the book of Acts, chapter 8, verses 26 to 40, where Philip, the deacon, Philip, shares the gospel with him, and he is sent from the queen of Ethiopia. So he's clearly from Africa towards, if you go south of Egypt, towards Ethiopia. And he became a believer. According to Acts, he heard the gospel, he believed the gospel, and was baptized by Philip. And then in due time, he returned. So when this Ethiopian eunuch returned back to Ethiopia, then he would have presumably, as a believer, he would have shared the gospel in his home country. And so what that means is that if this Ethiopian eunuch goes into Ethiopia, this is right after the gospel had gone to the Samaritans. This is incidentally before Saul of Tarsus is called, because that pops up in Acts 9. And then only after a while, we're told that Paul had to go on a hiatus. He had to go for a while into being absentee, absentia. And this Ethiopian eunuch, in the meantime, when he returns to Ethiopia, I have no doubt in my mind that he was planting the seeds of the gospel in Ethiopia, presumably before Paul even took the gospel out into the Greco-Roman world. And so, if anything, the gospel, the church did get its roots started in Jerusalem, to be sure, but outside of Jerusalem, it does not seem far-fetched to think that this Ethiopian eunuch took the gospel down into Ethiopia. And then in the book of Acts, chapter 13 verse 1, we read about another individual there that was with Barnabas and with Saul, that is Paul, Simeon, who was called Niger. We read about this Simeon who was called Niger. Now, that word Niger there, you think of the name of Nigeria, the country of Nigeria. The word Niger is a Latin loan word. I apologize for that typo there, folks. That's supposed to be, it's not necessarily a Latin load word. It's actually a Latin loan word. And what does that Latin word Niger mean? It means dark or black or dark complexion, which means that Simeon was being referred to here as someone who had a dark complexion. Why would they call him Simeon Niger, who was called Niger? Probably to distinguish him from other Simeons or Simon, because Simeon and Simon were a very common Jewish name. And remember, Simon Peter. Peter was also, his Hebrew name was Simon or Simeon. And there were a number of these Simons, just like Simon of Cyrene, for example, who was from Libya. This other Simeon, we're not exactly told exactly where he's from, other than to say that he had a dark complexion and probably was from Africa. Was he the same person as Simon of Cyrene? Well, we're not really told, and we certainly don't want to jump to any conclusions here that are unwarranted, and so we want to avoid those interreadings or avoid the eisegesis of reading into the text what's not there. So again, that Nubian, that Ethiopian eunuch, which we have a good chunk of scripture there in Acts 8, 26 to 40 that deals with him. So in the story there, of course, Philip, who again is one of the deacons, he's not to be confused with Philip the apostle. He's not the apostle Philip. He is the deacon, Philip. Again, there's another word, another name that was very common among Greek-speaking Jews, and that was, of course, Philip. And so here in the book of Acts, Philip, being a deacon, is told to go and share the gospel with the Ethiopian eunuch, after which the Ethiopian eunuch hears about the gospel of Christ and receives Jesus, receives the gospel, and Philip baptizes him. Water, they see water, and even the Ethiopian says, Here is water. What is there to prevent me from being baptized? And so this is a very important story because, as I said, I cannot imagine that this Ethiopian left or Philip was taken away. This says the Spirit of the Lord took Philip, yes, Philip away. He whisked him away, and the Ethiopian was left alone. And there's no doubt that when he had returned to Ethiopia, as I said, this would have been the seed planter of the gospel. Now, Dr. John Miti, who is a Kenyan scholar who passed in 2019, is a very interesting scholar. He has studied the history of Christianity in Africa, and this is what Dr. Mabidi has to say. He says, and I quote, Christianity in Africa is so old that it can rightly be described as an indigenous, traditional, and African religion. Long before the start of Islam in the 7th century, Christianity was well established all over North Africa, Egypt, parts of the Sudan, and Ethiopia, close quote. So here you will notice that Dr. Mabiti makes it very clear that Christianity in Africa is old, and that it can be it can be described as not only an indigenous religion, but also a traditional and African religion. That Christianity can be described as an African religion. Now, again, how did Christianity get to Africa? I mean, there's some stories about Greek missionaries going down there and bringing the gospel there. But again, I believe that the Ethiopian eunuch is the best candidate of bringing the gospel down into the area of Ethiopia, perhaps even before, not just Ethiopia, but even beyond the borders of Ethiopia into, as Dr. Mabidi says here, into Egypt and parts of the Sudan and so on. So it's very clear then that if this is the case, then this would show that far from Christianity being the white man's religion, it's actually in many respects the black man's religion. It's the religion that rooted very early in the continent of Africa. And as we've seen already, the primal candidate here seems to be the Ethiopian eunuch. And so I would agree with Dr. Mabidi here that it is very old. Christianity is very old in Africa. Another thing that we should consider is a stone pendant that was discovered in Ethiopia. It's a stone pendant with a cross in Ethiopia's ancient Ge'ez script. So that was the ancient script of Ethiopia. 4th century AD, this is around the time of the conversion of Constantine, the emperor, the Roman emperor. This is also the time of the not just the conversion, but the Council of Nicaea and Council of Constantinople is going on in the north in Byzantium, which would be the parts of Turkey, primarily Turkey, the country of Turkey today. And the discovery of this pendant from the 4th century is very interesting because it shows us that Christianity was already there. It was already present in Ethiopia. And some scholars have even surmised that it's possible that Christianity may have been in Ethiopia already in the 3rd century, that is the 200s AD. They believe it got to Egypt in the 3rd century. And others surmise that it was also in Ethiopia. But once again, I think that the reason why Ethiopia has a very rich historical Christian tradition, again, why does Ethiopia have this very rich tradition? And the fact that there's even manuscripts written in various languages, in like Sahidic, for example, Ethiopic, the Book of Enoch, for example. There's an Ethiopic translate manuscript of it, rather, and so Ethiopia bears some very ancient earmarks here when it comes to ancient Christianity. So this pendant is quite interesting. You have a cross there at the top there in the center. And so this was discovered by a church ruin, a ruined church that was uncovered in Ethiopia containing that ancient script, thereby showing how far back Christianity has rooted itself in Ethiopia. Now, the other thing we should also understand is that the Axumite Empire, which was the kingdom of, as you can see on the map there, of Axum, these were the regions of Ethiopia and Eritrea. The Axumite Empire was strongly Christian. And again, the dates are the 4th century. Again, this is the time where up in the north in Turkey or Asia Minor, the Byzantium kingdom, you have Constantine converting, and of course, Constantine overseeing the Council of Nicaea and so on. But at this time, as the Byzantine kingdom is moving forward and Christianity is spreading out, there's already a very strong Christian empire down in Ethiopia, or one of its other ancient names was Abyssinia. Abyssinia was one of the ancient names of Ethiopia. So the kingdom of Axum, as you could see there, also ruled over South Arabia. And so what we call today Saudi Arabia, the Axum Empire ruled that as well, which means there were Christians there as well. And it's not surprising because when Islam comes along, there are Christians in that region already. So what this shows us is that we have a parallel Christian kingdom in the Axumite Empire that seems to parallel the Christian kingdom in Byzantium. And again, this shows us that already in Africa, there was a very strong Christian foothold that had started there. The other thing we should also bear in mind is that a number of the great church fathers have come from Africa as well. And so Clement of Alexandria was a major city in the country of Egypt. Already in Alexandria in the mid 2nd century, you have Clement of Alexandria, a very important church father who wrote a number of books, or not so much books, but treatises. He wrote on various topics of theology, and so he comes from the region called Alexandria. We also have Origen of Alexandria, and he's also obviously from Egypt, from Africa, another important patristic writer. A lot of debate about whether or not he was really a church father, because there was some heterodox teachings that Origen taught, like the idea of universalism, that everything in the end would be reconciled to God, including Satan and the demons and so on. But the point being that Origen was one of the clearest, one of the most significant thinkers in the region of Alexandria. In fact, the whole Christian world. He was a scholar of languages, and he was one of the first to write or put together what's called the Hexapla, which was a parallel between the Hebrew and the Septuagint and other languages. He had paralleled these passages together. He was really the first to create the parallel Bible when you think about it. But he was indeed a great thinker. We also have Tertullian, and Tertullian was a Latin father. He's the first of the Latin fathers, begins writing in Latin. And Tertullian was also African. He was from Carthage, which was part of Tunisia. And so, again, another African father who is very, very, very influential. And some of his great works are done on the Trinity and on various Christian topics like the resurrection, and also his works against the heretics as well. We also have Athanasius of Alexandria, one of the great defender of orthodoxy. Athanasius was also called the Black Dwarf. The Black Dwarf, that was his nickname, the Black Dwarf. And he was also African. He was from Egypt. And he was the one who defended the deity of Christ. The Council of Nicaea emerged from Athanasius' hard work of defending the deity of Christ against the heretics like Arius. And so Athanasius, the Black Dwarf, was an African, very important church father, and wrote a great work on the incarnation as well. Then we also have the great doctor of the West, the doctor of grace, as he's been dubbed, Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, And where is Hippo? In Algeria, in Africa as well. And so the great Augustine, who wrote The City of God and who wrote the Confessions, the great thinker, and the one of the fathers of the church who wrote a harmony of the Gospels as well, a great thinker, a great philosopher who really molded Western society as we know it today. And so Augustine, again, was also a Christian from Africa. At the end, we need to acknowledge that the book Revelation, which depicts the end of time, the way it describes the end, it describes the nations coming together before the throne of God, the redeemed. John says, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." So notice, John sees a great multitude. And he notices that in this great multitude is so large that no one could number it. Notice that this multitude is composed of those from every nation, from all the tribes of the earth, from all peoples and languages. Notice how they're all joined together. They're standing before the throne. These are the redeemed. They're standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Notice they're clothed in white robes. It doesn't say they're white. It doesn't say they're before the Lamb and they're all white. No, they're clothed in white robes. The whiteness is the robes, not the skin color. And they have palm branches in their hands, and they cry out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And so at the end of the day, all those nations that come from that one man who is the forefather of all humans, one day, those nations that come from that one man will come together as a great multitude, as the one church made up of all peoples and tongues and languages. They will come and glorify the Lord. It's not about color. And it's been said many, many times, it is not about skin, it's about sin. It's not about race, it's about grace. And so I trust that this endeavor of mine, I hope that it has brought some light to the subject and has helped in giving you some tools to respond to this nonsense that we hear that Christianity is the white man's religion. That is born out of ignorance. It's not based on the evidence, not even based on the Bible itself. Before I let you go, folks, just want to mention my book, No King But Christ, The Collapse and Bankruptcy of Secular Worldviews is out. And this book deals with how to deal with, well, part of this whole Christianity is the white man's religion. A lot of it has to do with the whole critical race theory idea. It has to do with this woke mentality, this social justice ideology. I deal with that in this book, how to deal with the whole cultural Marxist approach, the transgender movement, how do Christians relate, and most importantly, the kingship of Christ, how we need to maintain and understand that Christ is King of Kings and that the Lord Jesus is seated on his throne and is the sovereign over all things. And also my other book, Early Christian Creeds and Hymns, What the Earliest Christians Believed in Word and Song. This book deals with the creeds that are found within the text of Scripture, in the New Testament text. And also there are hymns. You may not know this, but there are hymns, there are songs inside of the New Testament. I mean, they're in the Old Testament. I mean, the book of Psalms are basically songs that were sung, but we need to understand that within the New Testament, the idea of creeds emerges from the Bible. The reason why the church has creeds like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed is because the Bible is filled with creeds, and we can extract those creeds, and that's what I do in that book. If you're interested in any of these books, I'll put a link in the description box where you could go and purchase a copy of these books through Amazon and other outlets as well. So I want to thank you again for watching, and I trust that this has been helpful. And again, I just want to thank all my subscribers. Thank you for your support. Some of you have asked if they'd like to give a love offering. If you want to give a love offering, that is completely between you and the Lord. We don't ask. We don't have marathons, and we don't go asking for donations. But if you wish to, there's a link in the description box where you can give either through Patreon or you can give through PayPal. That's available to you. And so if you'd like to do that, if you want to do it on a one-time basis, whatever you want, I just want to make it very clear that people, if they want to show their appreciation or their support or their love, that's between you and the Lord. You're free to do so, and it will be greatly appreciated. And so we want to keep these types of videos going out. We want to keep this type of teaching available on the internet so that many people may have access to it in the various parts of the world. Some people who may not have the ability or the wherewithal to obtain books and resources on how to defend their Christian faith. And so the church around the world, they need this. This is a very important work, and they need these tools to help them protect and defend their faith against the enemies. And thank you again for just all those who've responded with very kind words of support and gestures. Really appreciate that. And may the Lord bless you. So until next time, everyone, take care. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, to like and share the video. God bless.